we're talking about campaigns and elections today. We heard from Beth Reinhard this morning from the Wall Street Journal. We heard from Claudia Dean, who's with the Pew Center. She talked to us about polling. And so now we're going to talk about money. So one of the important factors in covering any race. Bill Allison is Editorial Director for the Sunlight Foundation. He is a friend of NPF. He's presented many times for us. We really respect his deep knowledge and his ability to be clear about how all of this stuff works. Before being at the Sunlight Foundation, he was at the Center for Public Integrity for 9 years. He's co-authored a number of books that have to do with the influence of money in elections. He also worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer as a researcher for the Pulitzer Prize winning team of Barlett and Steele. So he's got a great background for this, and I'm really looking forward to this session. Did we decide we're going to have a break at some point? We're going to do this.
I don't think we did, but we were certainly we can certainly do that. That'll be fine.
I'll leave this to you.
Okay.
We'll kind of get a sense of the crowd. It's a full room, full house. So we'll see how it goes. So
Okay.
take it away. Thank you.
Alrighty. Whoops, did we just lose? Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to turn that on. Thank you so much for having me, Linda. It's always a pleasure. And the one thing I'll say, I mean, please feel free to stop and interrupt me as I'm going through things, because, I mean, money in politics and campaign finance, unfortunately, has become, and it always was, but it's gotten even worse. It's ridiculously complicated these days with super PACs and what's an electioneering communication and why are they doing this? They don't have to disclose it, but then when they do it now, they do have to disclose it. So please feel free to interrupt me at any time as I kind of go through this stuff. But I thought I'd start with something as about as simple as I could to kind of get across like why this stuff is important and why so many people follow this. And I think it's because to members of Congress, this is their job, is raising money. And I don't care what anyone else says about why they come to Washington or anything else. What they really do, they spend more than, I think it's 40% of their time is what is expected of a member to raise money. If they're not particularly good at it, they're spending more than 40% of their time doing it. So this is what they really come. When you look at leadership positions in Washington, what is the number one criterion for getting a committee chairmanship or rising in party leadership, getting a leadership position in the House or the Senate? It's the ability to raise money. That is, it is not your judgment, it is not your good looks, it's not your intelligence. It's the fact that you can pull in tons and tons of money, and the system really runs on money. It is the most important thing to members of Congress and to politics. I mean, there's the old Mark Hanna joke. There are three things important in politics: money, and I can't remember what the third one is. And it's really, really true. I mean, you know, the more I look at this stuff, the more I become convinced of this. And this is just a story that I did. It's not the greatest money in politics story by any means, but I think it does show you a very important thing. And one of the, I think, critical things is do not ignore the kinds of fundraising that members of Congress do because, oh, it's not very much money. It's $10,000, it's $12,000, it's this, that, or that. Because this is like the most important money is money going to candidates. But this is a story I did about something called the Global Hawk. It's a drone that's made by Northrop Grumman, the big defense contractor. The Air Force does not want to pay for this thing. And the reason is, it was great to fly over Afghanistan where people have AK-47s and maybe a couple of RPGs. And so it was basically invulnerable over Afghanistan. You fly this over someplace like Ukraine where there's they were able to shoot down a passenger jet. You fly it over someplace where China is engaged. You fly it over any place where there's somebody who's more advanced than the Taliban militarily, and this thing is a sitting duck. It can be blown out of the sky. Whereas if you float over Syria, whereas a U-2 spy plane, which is something we built way back in the Cold War, it's a done weapons system. There's a little bit of maintenance and upkeep for it, but basically there's nobody. Lockheed Martin built it in the 50s and 60s. Nobody is lobbying for U-2 spy planes anymore except for the Air Force. They want to keep this plane flying, and under the current budget constraints, they have to give up one or the other. This is what, the Air Force generals have talked about this. There's an interview with a guy saying that this thing cannot fly in contested airspace. It also can't fly in bad weather. So if it's raining, we don't have any surveillance. But to give you a sense, and let me see if this is going to work. I should have done this fine first. So Northrop Grumman, though, does not want the Air Force to cancel its contract with Boeing, and or its contract with the Pentagon to build these things in the Air Force. And so this is the most recent, this was the kind of continuing resolution that came out, or the defense spending last March, I think. And here's section 8118. The Secretary of the Air Force shall obligate and expend funds previously appropriated for the procurement of RQ-4B Global Hawk aircraft for the purposes for which such funds were originally appropriated, provided that none of the funds are made available, blah, 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 may be used to retire, divest, realign, or transfer Global Hawk aircraft. So basically what this is saying is you have to buy the Global Hawk and you have to use it. That's what this money for. This is a law. This is in a law that passed both houses of Congress that the president signed, telling the Air Force that they have to use this weapon system that they basically think is a piece of junk. And which is not to say Global Hawk is like useless or can't do anything, but for the job that Northrop Grumman wants it to do for the Air Force, it cannot do that job. So, curious about this, and actually the reason why I got curious about this was because of this. This is, how many people use Open Secrets or know OpenSecrets.org? Okay, OpenSecrets.org, Center for Responsive Politics. They've been around more than 25 years, and this is one of the great tools for using campaign finance data. And Sunlight makes some tools too, and I have a preference for our own organization, but we think of CRP as a sister organization, and Sheila Krumholtz is like somebody I talk to almost every day. So I'm going to show you their stuff and our stuff too, and there's a slightly different way you use what we do. But anyway, one of the great things about CRP is that they add these things up, and so here is their PAC page, and this is the 2014 election cycle, and this is how much, and let me just start scrolling through these so you can start getting an idea of how many House members. This is just the House. It's about 754,000 to Democrats, 982,000 to Republicans, and if you just start scrolling and scrolling, we're just in the B's and the C's.
435 on there?
There is, the last time I checked was in, this was before this would be like January of 2014, so that would have been just 2013. They had already given to like 270 House members, and I forget how many senators, so more than half. And they gave, I think it was 66 senators, and they've obviously given to more people than that. I mean, this just keeps going and going. And if you think about those PAC contributions, they are not just putting a check into a mail, or check into an envelope, slipping it into a mail, and that's the end of it. The PAC is run by their lobbyists, and the registered lobbyists for Lockheed Martin, for Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, every other defense contract, everybody else who has a PAC, they run these political action committees. It's the lobbyists, it's the people who do government relations, and they sit down with a member of Congress at a fundraiser, and they, and they don't actually, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but they don't actually hand over the checks there, but they will be meeting and greeting lawmakers and talking to them. This is a record of a contact between a special interest and a member of Congress. It is not just a $10,000 donation, or which would actually be two $5,000 donations. This is a record of a contact, and you can see how many people Northrop Grumman is contacting in Congress. I mean, it's just incredible. This is like a full court press. Now, not every special interest does things like this. There are some that will only focus on a committee chairman, and instead of having the PAC that fans out all across Congress, they'll have the PAC, the president, the vice president, the senior vice president for global affairs, the junior vice president for, and all these people all making the maximum contribution. And you'll see, like if you look at Mitch McConnell, and then I'll show you in a second how to look up Mitch McConnell. If you look at Mitch McConnell, and his top donor is this company, Kindred Healthcare. I think it still is. It was the last time I looked. I mean, it may have changed since the election is going on. I'm sorry, now you have to, I hope I'm not giving anybody vertigo. And the easiest way to use Open Secrets Insight is this search box, which there are these, all kinds of tabs and different things to kind of guide you around. But these days, I just do Mitch McConnell, and then it brings it up, and it just kind of breaks it. There's politicians and lobbyists, there's organizations, if there's an organization name, and so on. And so there's Mitch. And if you click on Mitch, you will get, so these different tabs. There's the summary, which gives you a nice overview. Elections, since he's a senator, he runs on a 6-year cycle, not a 2-year cycle. But let's just look at his donors. Oh, it's Blackstone Group. Okay, never mind. And you can see they've given $222,000. A PAC can't do that. So it has to be like their executives and bundling the money for the member of Congress. And so you can see that CRP breaks this out nicely. On the side, you have the Political Action Committee, which is the account that a company will set up. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But I just kind of wanted to show you that, that this is a very different strategy. Blackstone Group giving a ton of money to Mitch McConnell, who is the minority leader of the Congress, very important for stopping legislation, and is a good guy to know in Washington. And Kindred Healthcare has dropped all the way down to number 5. And they are an in-state, the company is headquartered in his state of Kentucky. And you can see all these financial firms have kind of moved up to the top since then. But anyway, so that's another way of doing it, is giving a ton of money to one member of Congress. And when you're a member of Congress, these are the really important kinds of money that you're getting. It's the money to your campaign committee and to your leadership PAC, and the money that you control. I mean, we've heard a lot about super PACs, and I happen to think there's a lot of coordination between super PACs and campaign committees. But basically, I mean, how many people are familiar with the definition of a super PAC and the difference between a super PAC and a campaign committee? Okay, so I'll briefly explain it. Super PACs are what came out of the Citizens United decision through a very circuitous route, which I won't bore you with because it's the vagaries of campaign finance law. But basically, a super PAC is a political committee that does not make contributions to other or to other committees. And so it's not making a contribution to Mitch McConnell. It's not making a contribution to the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. It's just spending its money on independent, vote for me, vote for this guy, vote against that guy, vote for Republicans, vote against Democrats, whatever their message happens to be. And because the Supreme Court in the Citizens United campaign, or Citizens United decision ruled that corporations could spend on that kind of speech, that they could, any corporate entity, in the Citizens United case, it was a 501c4 organization as a nonprofit. And I'm getting like way far afield from where I wanted to be right now. And I think actually I'm going to call an audible. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm not going to do this out of order because it's just going to get really confusing. Let's just stick with campaign committees for a minute. So in terms of campaign committees, this money coming in, I just want to show, and this is like a really important thing as well. This is from a U.S. Attorney's Manual. This is for the public integrity section, the guys who go after campaign finance violations and who will investigate. These are the guys who investigated, like Ted Stevens, who had a trial and was convicted, Jesse Jackson Jr. This is the section that goes after members of Congress. And this is their U.S. Attorney's Manual that tells them what the rules of prosecuting members of Congress are. And it says that a bribery charge can be premised on a campaign contribution, but be careful. It is problematical that a gratuity charge and blah, blah, blah is going can rest on a bona fide campaign contribution unless the contribution was a ruse that masqueraded for a gift to the person of blah, 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 and this goes on and on. What it's basically saying is the campaign committee is not the member of Congress. So when I give money to Mitch McConnell for Congress, I am not bribing him because he's not getting the money. His campaign committee is getting the money. And it even says here that, let me see, this is because campaign contributions represent a necessary feature of the American political process, and blah, 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 and they are almost always given and received with a generalized expectation of currying favor with the candidate benefiting therefrom. So, and that's, that's really, I mean, this is like built into our system of government, is this idea that people give contributions expecting a benefit, members accept the contributions expecting to be asked for a benefit from the donor. I mean, it's right there, and it's telling you that you cannot prosecute somebody for that. So, so when you see all of this big money coming in, and then you can almost always come up with some kind of a quid pro quo. It may not be immediate, it may not be right away, but there's, this is why, I mean, I have never seen I would be shocked if you could come up with an example of somebody who had spent a huge money on politics without having an agenda in Washington. And figuring out what the agendas are is a big part of this when you're looking at the donors and who the donors are and who's getting the money and who's and what's behind that. Okay, so that's my sermon about money and politics. Have I lost everybody? Okay. Let me show you then, or let me talk a little bit then about the difference between, and I'm going to go to a Sunlight site right now, but the difference between, outside spending, inside spending, and so on and so forth. So, okay. So under the campaign finance system that grew up after Watergate, you had, if you're a member of Congress or you're running for a federal office, president, House, Senate, you set up a campaign committee that's created under, and this is what's so frustrating about campaign finance law, is that it implicates several other areas of law, including tax law. Like every campaign committee that the FEC and the Federal Election Campaign Act imagines being involved in politics is organized under Section 527 of the Internal Revenue Code. And Section 527 is basically, the Internal Revenue Code says this is to create campaign committees that for people running for office. And what's funny about that is it doesn't say, 527 doesn't say things like political action committees. It doesn't say all of these things are things that kind of grew up after, because again, Section 527 predates all the other federal election law. But anyways, so 527. So that's Republican National Committee is a 527. McConnell for Congress is a 527. If I ran for my local dog catcher office and set up a political action committee, that would be a 527. So these are all 527s. It's to elect somebody to office. And then you have federal law and also state laws that determine how those committees disclose to, what they disclose. They disclose, how often do they disclose their donors. They set the rules for 527s at the federal level. You can only raise, right now it's $2,600 per election from an individual. It's $5,000 from a PAC and so on. State law can vary wildly. In Texas, it's kind of a wild, wild west. You can give almost anything to anybody. In some states, the top donation is, I think, is it Montana? It's like $200. I'm not an expert in the state laws, but the limits are really, really different. And one of the big things which you guys will not have to deal with, but that I've dealt with in the past, there is a huge amount of money laundering that goes on between the hard states and the soft states, where states that can use, where there's not as much hard money, will have, where the limits are much lower, so you can only give $200, and so they've tapped out their donors for, like, say, their political party. But there's a lot of $200 donors to the Florida Republican Party, so they move money in there, and then the Montana donors who can't give to the Montana Party give to the Florida Party, and you see these movements of money. This is what Tom DeLay actually got in trouble for in Texas, was basically arbitraging different states' campaign finance laws. And again, that it involves sometimes federal candidates, sometimes state candidates, but again, you probably don't have to worry about that to cover an election. Okay, so those are 527s. Now, starting in, and this is even before the McCain-Feingold law was passed in 2002, there was a creature that is called just a 527 committee, and this is like Swiftboat Vets and MoveOn.org, and there's a host of, and they're not trying to elect a candidate, they're not a political party, they're not contributing to other candidates, and these kind of grew up, and an awful lot of, like, Thomas Bliley used to be a representative from Virginia. His name is on Bliley, or was it Graham Bliley? Why am I blanking on Leach? Yes, the bill that repealed Glass-Steagall. Thomas Bliley had a 527 that basically it was not registered in Virginia. It was not registered at the federal level because it didn't do anything that was it wouldn't trigger any of the disclosure requirements for states. Like basically the Federal Election Commission, once you've raised $1,000 to elect a federal candidate and spent $1,000, you have to start registering with the FEC. They have these limits and these triggers of activity. So he didn't do any. He wouldn't spend the money on federal candidates. He spent it on state candidates. He wouldn't trip Virginia's campaign finance law. So he had this huge pool of money. He took like $100,000 from Philip Morris, the tobacco company, among others. He was one of the big people who was against any kind of tobacco regulation. And he was able to do this because he had this committee that just didn't trip any of the definitions that were in law. So 527s were hugely popular up through the 2004 election. Swift Boat Vets was the classic example of these things. They ran all of the ads saying that, and again, and this gets into another really ugly area of election law, where they would run the ads that were saying things like, about John Kerry's Vietnam service and, John Kerry unfit to lead and things like that. And then basically the thing about this is that in federal campaign finance law, there's something called express advocacy. So if I say vote for John Kerry, that has to be reported differently than if I say tell John Kerry to stop being a jerk or whatever it is that I'm saying in my message. And that's an electioneering communication. So I can get across very different kinds of information of those things. Well, anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself again, but the 527s ran into trouble with the Federal Election Commission, not because of any of the spending they did in that 2004 race, but because their fundraising appeals said things like, we are going to knock George Bush out of the White House, or we are going to stop John Kerry from being elected. And so that was the thin reed on which they hung these things. So all these guys got fined, and this created a huge problem for people who want to spend big money on elections. They couldn't write huge checks to the political parties anymore. There's no more soft money. They couldn't write huge checks to these 527s because when the FEC was investigating Swift Boat Vets and everything that went on in the 2004 election, they were calling up guys like George Soros and having them come in and deposing them. And they were calling up, the big donors to the 527 organizations on the Republican side too. So this kind of created a chill. In the meantime, there was this very entrepreneurial group called Citizens United that was run by David Bossie, who was a former House staffer who looked into Whitewater with the Clinton era and everything. It was founded by the guy who ran the infamous Willie Horton ads, named Floyd Brown, back in 1988 against George Dukakis. So Citizens United has this long-standing, history, and they came up with this nifty idea: what if we do a movie that talks about Hillary Clinton, and basically we're the equivalent of a publisher or a documentary filmmaker, but we're going to advertise this movie and pay for it with corporate funds, and we're going to see if the Federal Election Commission is going to let us do it. And there are actually 3 or 4 dress rehearsals for this, including by a guy who was like a Waco conspiracy theorist and a gun rights attorney and who lives in Tucson, Arizona. So they did several different test cases before they launched the main appeal, and basically what they were trying to do was get a ruling from the courts on whether or not they could attack Hillary Clinton in a commercial during an election period and pay for it with corporate money. Because if at that point, if you were Exxon and you wanted to run an ad saying don't vote for Hillary Clinton because she's going to ruin our business, you couldn't do that. And so that's what they were testing. They were pushing up against this, and that led to the Citizens United ruling. And since then, we're in this totally different world now, where you have these organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, able to spend money to influence elections, as long as they can't give to candidates, because that would be corrupting, but they can spend millions of dollars to elect candidates. So that's sort of the universe we find ourselves in these days. And some of these groups do not disclose their donors, like the 501c4s and the C6s. There are some, and I'll show you a little bit of what Open Secrets has been doing on that to track this stuff and citizen audit too. But that's kind of the world we find each other's in. And I've kind of done the introduction like rambling for like a half hour, and I feel like I've more confused people than helped them. But let me show you some of the tools for and what some of these things look like. And actually, Paul, are there questions? I feel like I went through that quickly.
I just want to make sure we ask you to clarify. These new groups can raise a lot of money, but they still are not allowed to coordinate with campaigns.
Yes, exactly. Okay, yes. And this is one of the things that is really fascinating when you're looking at these organizations. You have to look at the statements of organization, which are one of the forms they file at the Federal Election Commission. Because, so what happens is, who is running the super PAC is critical. And I don't know if you remember from the 2012 Republican primaries, but there was a time where on stage you have Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney debating each other about their super PACs. And Gingrich saying, well, my super PAC isn't going to, or, your super PAC is running this ad, and they're saying this as if it's like something that they control and something like, and even saying to one another, get your super PAC to stop running these ads. And then after Gingrich lost in, I think it was New Hampshire, he said that Bain Capital was going to become an issue from now on. He was going to go full war on Romney. And right after that, this super PAC that's supposedly not coordinating with him comes out with like a 24-minute or 27-minute film about Romney and Bain Capital. So so the coordination. So let me explain. So an independent expenditure only committee is a separate organization. It can raise money in unlimited amounts from almost any source. It can take a check from General Electric, although for the most part, corporations have not given to these organizations. It can take a $1 million check from a Sheldon Adelson or a Tom Steyer, the guy who's pumping money into NextGen, which is the group that used to be interested in climate change and is now just interested in Democrats keeping the Senate. They can take money from labor unions. They can take money from nonprofits. This is one of my favorite ones, is that there is an organization called Citizens for a Working America, and they spent a lot of money in 2010 and in 2012, and they were a super PAC, so they disclosed their donors. So we looked for their donors, and their donor was this organization called New Models. And who is New Models? New Models is a 501c4. So you can find out who's giving money to the super PAC, but it's a nonprofit that doesn't disclose its donors. So, yes.
So how do you determine when a lawmaker is just representing their constituents or a big industry in their state and when they're on the take? Because campaign money is influential, it's not necessarily determinative, right?
Boy, I mean, I always get in trouble with, like, the policy people, but all of them are on the take. I mean, every single one, because they're all thinking about how am I going to get reelected. So maybe the guy who's not running for reelection, although he may be raising money for his leadership PAC, because he can do anything with that money after he leaves office. But they're all thinking about how, and so it's like a balancing act. And I think the question is now, there are there's like two kinds of corruption, I think, and there's like the corruption, like the Bob McDonnell corruption, the governor of Virginia, who's taking Rolex watches and money for his kids and all kinds of other stuff like that, and personally, and benefiting from it. And that's like, that's the kind that we actually prosecute and we go after, and McDonnell will go to jail. But there's the legal and perfectly acceptable corruption where Barack Obama raises $1 billion, where Mitt Romney raises, I think, close to $1 billion. I don't know if he quite got over the threshold. And where you take this money, and then then you have the reverse, where you sit down with these people and you make policy for the rest of us, and and the average Americans don't get a seat at that table. And and I think the classic example of this during the healthcare law negotiations. This is pre-Citizens United. Okay, this is in 2009. You had it was Jim Manley and a bunch of other people who were running the effort for the Obama administration, or sitting down with people from pharma, and because they had worked out this deal and how much of a haircut would pharma take, but it would be guaranteed more sales for its products, and this back and forth. And there's some recalcitrant senators, and they say, oh, well, you know what? We'll run ads, and we'll set up a group to run ads in their states to push, to support them, and talk about how great they are, and how they supported S-chip, and how they supported children's health, and how they did this, that, and the other thing. And, oh, great, it's a great idea. This is corporate money. And this is like, again, this is like money that's being spent ahead of time. And so I don't know what on the take means exactly, I guess, in this context, because it just seems like, to me, that the way the system is set up to work is for special interests to battle one another, and the public is largely left out of the process. And so, and I don't think it's a question of, that somebody is on the take or not. I think this is how the system works, and it's looking for, because every member of Congress is going to have, they're going to have big donors. They're very easy to find on open secrets, and it's just the question of what are they doing for those donors, or why is this guy giving them money? And sometimes, there are plenty of examples, like, with Global Hawk, that thing, there's many, this is like the classic defense industry thing. They have factories in everybody's district, and maybe not everybody's district literally on the Global Hawk, but there are plenty of members of Congress who there's going to be some plant that makes, an electronic, gewgaw for it, and they have like 15 employees who are in their district, or 20 employees, or 75 employees, and they're going to hear from those employees. We don't want to lose our jobs if Global Hawk is canceled. So it's not just, there are reasons other than the money, but the money is such an important part of it too. Yes.
Okay, since we're talking about following the money, let's go back to the Global Hawk example.
Mm-hmm.
So your headline was something about dry weather drone rains cash for members of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you go to the open secrets, you can see the donations from Northrop Grumman, but they are a monster defense contractor. How did you make that link that particular contribution from this monster defense contractor was to benefit Global Hawk?
Oh, you don't, and I don't think you can. I mean, that was one issue,
isn't the
though.
headline making that link?
Yeah, but that was one issue that they were definitely lobbying on, that the company was definitely interested in. I mean, yes, they have like a huge number. I mean, it's not, this is a company that 100% of its money just about comes from taxpayers. So they have a huge number of issues beyond Global Hawk. But we also know Global Hawk shows up in 3 different appropriations bills. That doesn't happen by accident, that this was something that you have to lobby for. So, and I don't think I'm making the link where I say Northrop Grumman bribes members of Congress to keep Global Hawk funded, but they are the maker of Global Hawk. They did rain cash on members of Congress, and Congress did insist on Global Hawk still being for the Air Force. So, so there is, I think that that's a legitimate link. And, there is, there's been reporting, I made a few calls myself, and it is like one of the top issues for this company right now is Global Hawk. I mean, it's one of the main systems. If you look at their annual report, they talk about Global Hawk. I think it's like the first item they talk about when they're talking about, for future growth, that they think that this is going to be a key product for them, that they're selling it internationally, that they're doing all these other kinds of things. So this is like a key item for them right now. And is it the only item they're lobbying on? No. And one of the things about lobbying reports that I wish that we had clarity on, they just give you a lump sum number and then they'll list issues. And if you look at Lockheed Martin, there are tons and tons of different on defense appropriations. I think they list every single weapon system that they have with the Pentagon, and it's just an amazingly long list. So it's not just Global Hawk that they're lobbying on, but I think that it's clear that there is a link between their activities and on this, and just the fact that you're able to get it into a bill in Congress. I mean, that's somewhat unusual.
Were you able to find who the member was that actually got the rider inserted into the bill? Like, were you able to backtrack there? Were there any commonalities among that same member and any of the other? You mentioned it was in 3 different bills.
I didn't. There's and this was like the 3rd bill that I reported on earlier. It had been McKeon and Moran from the House Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, who were the 2 champions of this, and they had written letters to the Air Force about it, and they were kind of taking the lead on it. And since it came out of the House and it came out of that subcommittee, I presume that those 2 were involved in it there on the 3rd one. But no, I was not able to nail that down for that particular piece of legislation. Yes?
You can postpone this if it interrupts the continuing presentation, but if there's an issue you're looking at where you're like, okay, backtracking from this bill language that is obviously something someone lobbied to get into the bill, and who did they donate to? Let's say you're starting from the other end, which is, in my beat, either in this campaign or this subject area, I'm curious in sort of figuring out what story the money is telling. I mean, what do you start to look for? Like, what are some places you can start to build, like, clues as to what might be an interesting story if you're not already starting with okay, this is obviously what they've been sort of trying to do, and this is how they've been making it rain.
So a bunch of things that I like to do. I like to start with, so if you're looking at a donor, right, so you've got the donor, you know who they are. And like there's one that I just came across for this project I'm working on. They're called CME Group, which is Chicago Mercantile Exchange. They're a for-profit company, and I'm trying to figure out what because they're one of the 200 biggest campaign donors over the last 6 years or so. And and so what are these guys are like? They're basically like they run this exchange. They're not like they're not like selling missiles or whatever. What is their interest in the government? And it turns out that they are the largest market for Treasury bills and Treasury debt products, and they have a very close relationship with the government because of that. And that was just looking up what their annual report said. So the first thing I do is find out as much as I can about the company. 10K forms are actually great to look at. I mean, they have they will talk about what the business's interests are. They will talk. There's usually a section on regulation. They will mention specific bills, and I feel like if it's important enough to make it into a Form 10K disclosure.
And 10K is an SEC filing?
That's an SEC filing. And let me show you one real quick if I can find. Okay, I'm going to leave the dry weather zone. So, and these days I've just been living on Edgar. So let's see. So let's do CME. And then, I'm sorry, I'll just go back real quick. So I went to sec.gov for those who haven't used it, and then filings, company filings search, which is the page that I'm on. And you can search by company name. I find it a huge pain in the neck because you never get what you're looking for. It's much better to look for the ticker symbol. The one exception to that is if you're looking for a company that's defunct, like SBC Communications, which is now AT&T, but you're interested in SBC when it was SBC before the merger, and I'm not sure like if that's going to turn up under AT&T or not. But if it's a defunct company, you have to search by the name. You can't search by the ticker symbol. Like if you're looking for Enron, I don't think that that may work. But if it's something that's merged into something else, it's like harder to find. So anyway, so that's CME, and then you can filter by filing type, and it's 10-K, and there's documents, and Form 10K, and this is, I think if I remember correctly, tiny type. And still, just a little better. And so I already know this, but so they're talking about actually the merger. We've heard of CBOT. CBOT is leading marketplace, agriculture and U.S. Treasury Futures, and then we scroll down a little further. So they have the ultra long bond Treasury futures, and this is something where Treasury wanted to change the maturity rates of its debt from about 4.5 years to 6 or 7 years, and they turned to CME to help them do that. Let me see. And other things, and somewhere down here, so they're saying about the rulemaking to do Dodd-Frank. I mean, it's kind of like, no-brainer that Dodd-Frank would be something of interest to these guys. But some of them, they talk about really specific things that have come up in terms of regulation. And let's see. And then they talk about various issues that are coming up. Let me see. So they have intellectual property rights and so on. So this will tell you like what is the most important stuff to this company. Our market data revenues may be reduced by decreased demand, poor overall economic conditions, so on and so forth. Like if you read Defense Company, it's all about budget sequester and the Budget Act, Budget Control Act, and how they need to lift those caps. If you read telecom companies, there's a host of different issues. It's all about like that last couple of miles of pipe from the networks that they've built into people's homes, and delivering, broadband and different services, and who's allowed to do cable, who's allowed to do who's allowed to do content, what are the rules for content, do they have to carry each other's signals and things like that. I mean, it's basically, if you read these things, these are the lobbying issues that these guys care about. So that's
So-
like,
So you start there,
mhm.
and then do you just start looking at where they've donated?
So then I think the next thing I look at, well, I think though, didn't you say you're sort of starting with, that somebody's a donor and you're going to work back in what they're interested in?
Honestly, I don't even know where I'm starting. Like, if I wanted to start to follow the money in my beat, like,
Okay.
what if I wanted to look at where if I'm starting with a candidate, for example, how do
Okay.
I go about
So
it?
if you're doing a candidate, the easiest thing is, assuming it's a federal candidate, is opensecrets.org. If it's a state candidate, it's followthemoney.org, which is the National Institute on Money and State Politics. And one other site, which is really good for this, because it has both, is influenceexplorer.com, which Sunlight does, and I have to plug my own organization once in a while. And so let's do, since he was in the news recently, Bob McDonnell. And it has a smart search. I put in Bob, it comes up Robert F. And there you can see he's gotten $22.8 million. The industries come from the codes that National Institute of Money and State Politics. So he's got, conservative ideological groups, real estate, business associations, securities and investment, and so on. Let me see.
And how soon after FEC filings does this populate?
We are always behind. We're much so opens. And this is like so. This is so Open Secrets puts up. So okay, we have a site. The fastest thing you can get, if you really want things quickly, is our real-time site. And this is realtime.influenceexplorer. Oh, that's Ad Sleuth. I'm sorry. Where is? Yikes! There we go. Real time. And and the way that the FEC works, except for Senate filings, is that everybody files electronically. There's basically a pipe that goes into the FEC and a place where that pipe goes into the FEC where we can break off that pipe or attach to that pipe and suck in all the information. We hit it like every 15 minutes. And the latest campaign filing will come up here. So if you're following a race and you want to see what the latest filing is, realtime.influenceexplorer.com is the place to go, and this will pull in. And the great thing about this is that when you're in the middle of something that's like involving a lot of independent expenditures, there's like a Senate race you're covering, or you're following a bunch of different close races, and that there's a lot of different groups that are making independent expenditures. This will have every single one of those things within 48 hours. Well, now we're actually in the 24-hour period because we're 60 days from the election. So it's so within 24 hours of these things airing or them spending the money, they have to file here, and you can see everybody who's filing, and you can filter this all kinds of different ways. You can file it by House race, Senate, House, Senate, particular races. Is there a race somebody's covering?
I'm covering the second district race in Arizona.
In Arizona, okay. So we can filter by House, filter by state. I'm so glad it's Arizona and not Wyoming. And there's the second district. And so this will show you a quick glance. And we've got the Rothenberg Political Report that tells you it's a pure toss-up. So we have the totals that candidates have raised, total that they've spent, and then the outside spending. And then we break it down by candidates, including the primary folks, and then get the most recent filings for everybody, and then the recent independent expenditures, so what's been going on in the last week or so. And then finally, who are all the groups that are spending, the outside groups, and what have they spent? Those are totals at the bottom. Yes?
So actually, just since we're on the page,
Mhm.
the U.S. Chamber
Uh-huh.
about Barber having a 75% voting for his party percentage. But something earlier this month from the Sunlight Foundation came out saying that he was the 4th ranking, like, most independent voting congressman. So, do you deal with people who use your information?
God, we do sometimes. There's a state level study that we did that for some reason people are interpreting as it was just like number of bills introduced and then the percentage that were, percentage that went to a committee, percentage that made it out of a committee, and this was like a statewide, a 50-state study. And so people are saying that most effective legislator or least effective legislator is what the ads say. And we've done a few trying to say that no, that's not what we're saying about this. But generally speaking, I mean, we put the information out, and people do distort it. Let me show you one other tool real quick. Maybe I should go to a different window. We do a site called opencongress.org, and incidentally, 75% is pretty independent. The way, I mean, we live in an era where being independent of your party means that you vote with it less than 90% of the time.
Well, I know actually a statement had said from the Sunlight Foundation that those percentages are kind of skewed because a lot of the votes that are taken into account are in
That's, I mean, we try to, we do try to get obviously like post office votes and things like that. We try to make it more substantive votes. The methodology is on here and how we do this, but there he is, and let me see. This is a site called opencongress.org, and this is where we put together all the information about members of Congress that we have, and let me see. Where is the summary? I'm sorry, this site is undergoing a major redesign, and then the two guys who are redesigning it left, and so it's like a little bit slower. That's really painful. I mean, unfortunately, Sunlight has like all of these really, really scary, smart people, but unfortunately, they sometimes get hired away. And shoot, I know we get this from GovTrack. So do you know govtrack.us? Which is their API powers our Open Congress site. And let's do not now. And let's look for Barber.
And who runs GovTrack.us?
It's a guy named Josh Tauberer, who was a linguistics student at the University of Pennsylvania, who put it together. And I think he has a larger organization now. I think which means like he's got somebody else helping him with the development. But this site was like a one-man show for a very long time. And so here's his, sponsorship analysis. And there's his voting record. And I don't see, this is driving me nuts because I know it's on here, it used to be on here somewhere. Including, they did something where votes with, maybe that's it, that they most often vote with this member. There you go, joining bipartisan bills. So this has the breakdown for him. Working with the Senate, government transparency, and so on. So this has pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty granular information on his voting patterns and broken down several different ways. So I still don't feel like I've answered your question though about how to.
So I mean, my question is like I have occasionally tried to go on the FEC or go on some of these sites, knowing that like everything in politics is money. Money is everything in politics. So I'm like, okay, so there's got to be some story on my beat about money, but I go and I just can't even figure out what I'm looking at, let alone enough to know what I'm looking for. So my question is more like, if you don't know what you're looking at in terms of like what the specific story is, but I want to start making better use of these sites, like how can I smartly start to go through some of this looking for stuff that jumps out
Okay.
as opposed to just like fuzzy PDFs of numbers that I won't
Okay, I
understand.
think this is what Influence Explorer was really intended to do. And this is so this site does several different things. It's like got our real-time stuff there. We have foreign lobbyists on here. We have, we break down things by people, by groups, and so on. We bring together state and federal campaign finance in one place. But if the thing about this is that we try to bring a whole bunch of information together on one page. And I'm just going to stick in, I feel bad as I was picking on Northrop Grumman earlier. So let's do Lockheed Martin.
Well, can I make another suggestion? You're interested in, if you're covering a campaign, right?
Well, I mean, I feel like that's the topic of the day, but I don't actually cover campaigns, so.
Okay, cybersecurity, right?
Yeah, so I'm a
USIS.
cybersecurity
Is that
reporter.
USIS? Who's the background security cyber?
Oh, they do the contracts. They do, yeah. So they're
So can we
they do background checks for contractors. Is USIS
Okay.
take a look at it?
the one that was just hacked?
Okay. So there they are. So there's their campaign contributions. You got Barack Obama, John Thune, Mitt Romney's up there. It's not a whole lot of money. But cybersecurity is a huge issue, but I'll show you a slightly different way to slice it. So then you have their lobbying, and they're spending a little bit more. They have, so it's 1.6 million spent, although that's over several years. We're in all years, yeah. So that's not a whole lot, and there aren't all that many bills they've disclosed.
So what does that mean? That in their lobbying disclosure forms, they have to say what bills they were lobbying on?
Exactly, bills and issues. But let's do, if you want to do cybersecurity, and here's something that I like to do, and since I do not have the link here, and I can never remember what it actually is because they've made it really complicated, Senate.gov, Public Disclosure, Lobby Disclosure Act, and you want to go to LD1, oh, whoops, no, I'm sorry. Where is it? Research, Lobby Disclosure Act database, search the lobbying disclosure, and so this is this kind of ugly field, and you can also do this on Open Secrets, although it's like not quite as, and you can also do this on Influence Explorer, but I prefer to do it here, and I'm never sure why, but I always feel like I might be missing something on those other sites. So I'm sorry, so here we have, let's get rid of that, specific lobbying issue. And then just to keep us from having getting wiped out by so many returns, I'm going to do filing year, and I'm just going to limit it to the current year. So I've picked those two fields, and so this is going to pull in lobbying stuff. So I'm going to pick filing year as the current year. We're going to do 2014, and let's just stick in cybersecurity. I hope I spelled that right. These are all the companies or interests that mention cybersecurity in a lobbying report as an issue that they're lobbying on. So how many of them are? We have 1,362. Now some of them, like you'll notice, like Gamalta, some of them are going to be, because it's quarterly reports, you're going to get, but you've got, so look at this 121, Strategies in Government Relations. So these are obviously pretty important lobbyists on this issue. You've got our friends at Accenture.
They spent a lot of money.
Yeah, the only thing about, what, with Accenture or?
Yeah, 4 lines of, what is that, 3 million?
Yeah,
3.2?
If you add it up?
all 6 figures.
Yeah. Well, it looks like one of these is an amendment, so I have to be careful not to double count. But as I said with lobbying reports, and this is the thing that drives me nuts about them, and again, I wish this disclosure was much better. And a couple reasons not to trust lobbying reports all the time or to compare them. So here's where they report expenses. And so it's $840,000. And if you total, and if you start scrolling through, so they're lobbying on budget, defense, education, finance, government, and there's no way to tell which one is the most important issue to them, or how many of these are important issues, or because lobbyists, and I have spent a lot of time talking to lobbyists to try to understand how they fill these forms out, which is very important to me to know. And there's, sometimes it's just a bill that they're monitoring, or anything in a particular area. The entire scope of their lobbying may have been to look up all the bills that mention cybersecurity so they could list them, and that's it. There's only one they care about, or there's none they care about. Yes?
Reporting on lobbying is changing a little bit because the number of registered lobbyists has declined in the last couple of years. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of people who don't have to file LDA forms, right?
Mhm.
Lobby on issues. How do you find those people who are looking at an issue or reporting on cybersecurity? You find the registered lobbyist percentage that's high, and then how do you find the people who are revolving around that?
The unregistered lobbyists? That's hit or miss. The only ways that I know to do it, one is, so that there are firms that are in this particular business, and some of them are lobbying firms, and look at the bios, because most lobbying firms, they will advertise somebody's experience and whatever, and so, like when I was looking for a lot of stuff on defense appropriations in the budget process, and so I started, and I found like these guys working for, they were working for lobbying shops, they were in the government relations department, they had not left, or they'd left government within like the last 6 months or something. They weren't registered to lobby, but they were working at these places, and their job descriptions would be called, he's an expert in talking to the Pentagon and blah, blah, blah. And so like clearly they're lobbying, or they're doing something that is lobbying. And as somebody, a political scientist said, I forget the exact numbers, like something like, there's 12,482 people registered saying they're trying to influence the federal government. Do you really think that's how many people are trying to in Washington, in a city of, a metro area of how many millions of people? But yeah, that's really the only way that I've found, is like looking for that kind of person, and trying to track. Sometimes it's like doing searches for. I'll stick in like I'll just do a really dumb Google search, something like. Site.com, Armed Services Committee, staff, McCain, government relations, and I'm just throwing in, off the top of my head. And so, and look what we've got. We've got a guy at LinkedIn. So he's currently McCain. See, there's McCain, Armed Services. Well, there's one, ex-Lockheed Martin lobbyist, now in continued defense oversight role. Yeah, no, this one didn't work. This something very close to this. It may not have been McCain. It may have been Moran or somebody else who's involved with the defense budget, but. Just something like that, and I think I put like House Appropriations Committee and Site.com and Government Relations or Government Affairs or whatever, but that's really hit or miss, and like that's something to do if like you've got like 15 minutes and before your lunch appointment is arriving, and you just feel like playing around with something, but there is no really good systematic way of doing it. We tried, if the officials, you can like FOIA their, so if like who in the White House or who in the executive branch is doing the cybersecurity work that you're interested in, although a lot of times you're going to run into awful roadblocks or any other issue, and you FOIA their appointment logs and that kind of thing and see who's meeting with them. That's something that we've done. And and sometimes it's like asking the lobbyists, the people who are registered lobbyists, who else is working on this issue, and I'm looking for more background, I'm looking for more expertise, and I'm looking for other people who are trying to move this. So, and occasionally they'll let somebody slip, particularly if they're working for a rival firm.
So, what are some good ways to sort of practice poking around in these, I guess? Because I assume that at some point you just kind of like have to familiarize yourself to are there any good exercises or?
Other than, actually using them, I don't think so. I mean, I can take you through a couple of things to show you how some of them work. And let me do political ad sleuth real quick, because this is another important, if I can find it. This is a new tool that Sunlight started working on, and now it's great because we have every single TV market in the country. So we've talked a little bit about what the spending, where the spending comes from, and looking up people on Open Secrets or Influence Explorer or on Real Time. How they spend the money is just as important, and just as, and a lot of it goes, most of the money raised goes to pay for TV time. So I think it's really important to keep track of, what they're actually spending the money on, and particularly if you're covering a campaign, this can be hugely valuable. And Ad Sleuth, so this site began actually when, and I won't take credit for it, my colleague Anu Narayan Swamy and I were having lunch with a guy who was the FCC's new Chief Technology Officer, and he was saying, I'm trying to make the FCC site more useful for reporters, what can I do? And she said, put the political file online. And she kept after him, and eventually, he brought it up, and I think that's why it happened. And the political file, basically, if you run an ad on television, you do an ad buy with its station, obviously, and they have to put that contract as part of their public record, along with their station renewal documents and everything else. The problem with this is you had to go to the station to get it until they started putting these things online. And for the 2012 election, they put the top 4 stations in the top 50 markets in the country. And starting in July of this year, they put everything up. And the great thing about this is you can actually see political spending in advance. And let me show you, let's do newest ads.
So you can see this information before the candidates have filed their spending reports, their quarterly.
Yeah, it's before they file the FCC, right, or FEC. And so what this is, this is, let me see.
So for example, the top one there says inquiry form, the next one says request. Is one just seeking out prices, or these are all buy orders, or?
This is the problem with this data is, so there is no standard form that is used anywhere. It's not like an FEC report where, the FEC started, they came up with their forms, and everybody uses them. This forms reflect the way that the stations do business. So they're reflections of their internal accounting software. There is the National Association of Broadcasters, which provides a model form for stations to use, which is basically something I think that they sell to their members or make available to their members. And a lot of stations use that, but a lot of times you just have to look at the document to see what it is. I wish I had a better explanation on that, but I don't. And I was showing this the other day, and we don't have this included yet, so I have to go to the FEC. So let's see. I'm going to apologize and make this bigger. I have to get my reading glasses to see this one. Are we there yet? Okay. Oh, this is a really interesting one. So this one, and again, this is like a weird reflection of how this station does business yet. So this is an ad buy, and let's just see who was it again. So it begins by telling you the firm, okay, the product, DSCCIE, political issue group, the station. The agency is the one buying the ad. They're the ones that actually that the campaign committee will contract with to then go out and buy media time. And you can see it's Tuesday through Friday, time 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Program, are we there yet? The rate is $18, 2 spots per week, two total spots, $36. But the really interesting thing, and I've started seeing these, I mean, this is really hit or miss. They're showing you the market totals. And so, and it's for this advertiser, it's $45,000 what they've spent. And then it has the breakdown of the different stations where they're tracking, you know, the ads for their competitors and for themselves as well. And let's see. Okay, and let me just go back real quick.
Do you happen to know where it says that rate is $18
Mm-hmm.
per what?
For a 30-second spot.
What?
That's the total.
That seems crazy.
It is amazing how, and this is Eric Paulson inquiry form. You know, and what we end up having to do a lot of is like call stations, and we're on the phone with stations all the time. Actually, Jacob Fenton, who's a developer who does this site, is just like, I hear him asking the craziest questions. Well, what is that box checked that's labeled, you know, coffee break or what, you know, they have like the weirdest notations on these forms. So you know, you do have to do some of your own legwork with this one, but it does have, like, you know, again, it's just like, and let's just do, let me see, whoops. Although this one, it doesn't actually look like, that does look like that's what, you know, there is something, that does not look like an ad buy, whoops. What are we getting there? It has an Excel sheet with it. Well, I've never seen one like this either. Usually they do not come through as Excel, they come through as, so there's Friends of Eric Paulson. Federal, primary general, date for air requested, spot length. So yeah, that's what it looks like. And it was granted. So anyway, the metadata from this, the thing that by which I mean, are we on Chrome? Okay, yeah. The metadata with this is what comes, you know, so it'll list, like, and this is what we can scrape from the FCC site. So you've got the TV station call letters, the market that it's in, the date that it's filed, the kind of race it is a U.S. House. Status not loaded means, do we actually have the document on the site, or is it still at the FCC and we haven't uploaded it yet from them? And most of these, it takes us a while to upload all of them into our system. Some of them will, and that metadata, have the number of spots and the total cost, but a lot of them don't, and the vast majority of them don't. And we are actually trying to get people to input that information when they, you know, look stuff up. And then we've got the name of the candidate or committee, like here's the DSCC, and there's Eric Paulson, and so on. So I guess that's what I was trying to figure out, because I wanted to make sure, because again, these things are not always easy to work with, and this is the one that we were looking at the first time. And let me just go back to that one, because I wanted to, which is not an Excel spreadsheet. And so the advertiser, it's product DSCCC.IE, and I've never seen one that lists them as product. Sometimes they're listed as buyer or customer or advertiser. And I almost wonder if that's in the wrong spot, like, you know, DS is supposed to be there, I don't know. But anyway, so these forms are like, what I'm trying to say is these forms can be really, really a pain in the neck and take some time. But if you're covering a specific race, you've only got so many stations to learn their forms, and like the chances are, if you've got 7 different stations, maybe 2 of them will use NAB and the rest of them will use their own forms, and you've got to figure out what they mean. But once you do, you can write about, you know, how they're spending money and who's spending money in the market. And this, you can find stuff by market here. let me see. We have market reports. And you can also look at by state. But let's see. So there's Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there's the most recent stuff for that particular market and the different candidates and so on that you can go through. And that can really help you as you're covering the campaign as it unfolds. Yes?
Can I ask a more general question?
Sure.
So, going back to the Northrop Grumman case,
Mhm.
that's a clear sort of quid pro quo example, but it's not always so clear. And when you're reporting on these stories, often you can show who donated the money, where the money came from, etc. But it can be frustrating to take the last step of saying, this person is obviously corrupt, and you bump up against a journalistic convention which says you can't really do that unless somebody like Bob McDonnell is found to be blatantly violating, federal law or state law or whatever. So
Mhm.
for somebody like you who is working on this issue, year in and year out, how do you do that without being discouraged that you can't often make that last link in as concrete a way as you would like?
Well, we used to do these books, The Buying of the President, and the idea behind that was we'd look at all the big donors to the presidential candidates and what was the relationship between these donors and these candidates. And and I can remember one of my favorite when Bill Clinton got caught. He basically took a huge amount of soft money from this company, Loral Space, who's Bernard Schwartz is was the CEO at the time, or at least the chairman of the board. He may no longer have been CEO. And he's a guy who gives a ton of money all over town right now. He gives to New America Foundation and everything else, and a bunch of other groups. And and there was a Justice Department investigation, did they transfer technology to the Chinese? Because there was a satellite they were trying to launch for China, in China. The rocket crashed, and Loral technicians basically may have given embargoed defense technology to the Chinese. I believe that was the issue, or expertise or something that violated, and basically did it on their own without any kind of Pentagon clearance. There was a Justice Department investigation, and it was dropped, and just mysteriously completely dropped, and the company was exonerated. And I think there was even some kind of announcement for Loral's shareholders so that they would know that the company isn't in any peril. And Clinton was asked about it, and he said, well, you can't prove I changed that policy solely based on campaign contributions. And that's the sort of the game that you always are playing in Washington. And so I think you just take it as it comes. I mean, this is the way the system works, and this is how you write about it, and these are the relationships, and this guy got X amount of dollars from this interest or that interest. And there's a bunch of different ways to break this down. I mean, one of the things that Open Secrets does that we preserve on Influence Explorer, you can look at it by industry, so you can look at the defense industry, or because or the oil and gas industry, because sometimes industries align. You can look at just two different companies, like when UPS and FedEx were having their war. I mean, do you guys remember this? It was and this is another example of a PAC giving to almost every member of Congress. UPS wanted, I think it was an Appropriations Act for post office or something, and they wanted to attach a rider to it that essentially would make it much easier for FedEx to be unionized, because Federal Express is almost completely union free. UPS has the Teamsters and all kinds of other unions that are part of UPS, and it's a huge competitive advantage for FedEx, depending if you believe the stock analysts, that they don't have the unions and don't have union costs. And so UPS wanted to force FedEx to play by the same rules it plays by, and they tried to get Congress involved in this. And so you see, UPS is giving to almost every single member of Congress, and eventually FedEx won the battle. But it's these two titans slugging it out by giving money to members of Congress, and that's how it's won. And I think that's how sort of how you tell the story. And it's not necessarily that the money ultimately made the decision for, that you could add it up and, oh, look, UPS gave $14 more and they won. But I think that does show, or it does show that this is sort of the price of admission to getting anything done.
How do you think that being able to do that impacts, so-called regular people, people outside the beltway, voters, people living wherever? You seem to have such a cynical attitude about politics and are so convinced that everybody's corrupt and everybody's a liar that they're often immune to issues.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that I buy that everybody, I think that people do think, Washington has incredibly low approval ratings and everybody thinks it's terrible. But, when you look at Congress, that what was like 8% or 13% or something, it's ridiculously low. But then I think you look at things like, the Tea Party, which, and again, there's I think there's two Tea Parties. There's like the Hijack the Tea Party movement, which is kind of funded by, people at the top. But there really was a concerted grassroots effort, and it's because they were upset by how Washington was doing business. And I think that there is, and I think that the corruption is the sort of the spur for people to get involved. And when we've had major systemic change, it's been because of Watergate. It's been because, it's scandals that drive it. Look at what earmarks did, just, less than 10 years ago. It flip-flopped the House from one way to the other and the Senate from one way to the other. And, and so you do have these upheavals. We got the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act. So I think that, the reporting on the scandals and reporting on this stuff is very important, and it's also important to hold members of Congress' feet to the fire because, think about where most campaigns are fought and is there one major issue that's going on now that was discussed in the 2012 campaign other than, the 80s called and they want their foreign policy back? Seriously, there's like this real flippancy of politicians. And I think that this information at least lets the public hold their feet to the fire. And hopefully, I don't know, I'm like always optimistic, but I always hope that what will happen is that if you report on this stuff, and lay bare these relationships and make it clear, who members of Congress are spending their time with, that the public will start to, demand something different or something better. And the last example I'll give, we've got Exim Bank renewal right now. Just about everybody on earth agrees that this is a huge corporate welfare program. That it's, since its inception, Barack Obama in 2008, this is corporate welfare. The Koch brothers, this is corporate welfare. Across the ideological spectrum. And yet what's happening right now, you've got, all of these supposedly progressive members of Congress. Elizabeth Warren will not take a shot at the Exim Bank. This is like, she's Mrs. Anti-corporate welfare, and yet she won't say an anti-crony capitalism. She will not say anything about that. And why is that? So I don't know. So that's my sermon on that. But I just think you got to keep reporting it and lay it out there for voters. And yes, you can't say somebody's corrupt. You don't need to, though. If you just kind of lay out what the facts are, I think the people will, understand it. Yes?
It's interesting you mentioned earmarks. There's like sort of that Washington narrative that I think has sprung up a little bit, that the only way, the reason Washington is so dysfunctional now is because they're not able to bring the pork home like they used to. And I think that's a fascinating concept. But I wanted to ask, you talked a little bit about Citizens United. What impact do you think McCutcheon is going to have going forward? Do you think that is as seismic as some people said at the time, or do you think that's not going to?
I think that a lot of lobbyists are going to be pretending that they've renounced their U.S. citizenship so they can't give to campaigns, because I maxed out used to be the excuse that everybody could give and everybody accepted, and now there isn't one. I don't think it's going to have it. First of all, those limits were never enforced anyway. The only time they were ever enforced was after the 1990 midterm elections, when a bunch of, they were mostly corporate raiders, guys like Harold Simmons and Donald Trump was one, and these were the guys who made their fortunes. Ron Perlman, who with Drexel Burnham Lambert, with leverage buyouts, and I don't know how many of you remember this, but this was sort of the derivatives of the day, or this was the big financial scandal of the early 90s, and they were talking about new laws on leverage buyouts and new tax laws, and they were going to enforce them, and Congress was crafting them, and Bill Bradley was one of the people pushing them. And so these guys gave, way over the limits, and eventually they got caught. It took like 2 or 3 years for them to get caught. They got fined. But, we did a look at the 2012 cycle before this was passed, and just did, some folks at Huffington Post, both former Sunlighters, Paul Blumenthal and Aaron Bykoff, did like actual reporting where they called people and they, broke, and they found, I think, 14 people who had violated the limit in 2012. And we just did like name and address matching and, name, occupation, address matching, and only identical matches. So it would have to be a Charles T. Rivers III, and if there's a Charles T. Rivers or Charles Rivers III, that did not count. So we just did this name, and we found I think like 150 who might have done it. I mean, we didn't bother to verify it, but we just did this for our own, curiosity. So I don't think this was ever enforced, and I don't think, I think that basically it just upsets lobbyists who now don't have an excuse for not giving and not showing up at a fundraiser.
We have time for just 1 or 2 more questions if anybody has them.
And if not, I'd love to address the question of whether or not there are still earmarks.
Yeah.
So there's something called
It's a good item issue to talk about.
a programmatic request, and this is another thing to look, and I've been actually spending a lot of time with these. In budget documents, let me show you Defense Controller, if I can spell it right. So when they used to have earmarks, they would have this language that, submit appropriations request by such and such a date, and this, that, and the other thing, and do this, and, it has to be here. They have the same language on the appropriation sites, but now instead of earmarks, they say programmatic requests. And they'll say things like include the budget title and program line item in your request. And so, and if you talk to members of the Appropriations Committee or members of Congress about this, they'll say, "Oh, well, these aren't earmarks. This is like really important for our, oversight of the purse." And it's basically saying that if you have some program that funds rural hospitals, and it was $10 billion in the last fiscal year, and under the sequester it's going to be cut to, it's only going to go up $11 billion, but you see like there's huge need for rural hospitals and that they have huge expenses, that you can say that you want that line item in the budget to be increased by X amount, and then it'll be increased by X amount. Now where am I seeing? So anyway, so that's what they say a programmatic request is. And I'm going to start over here because I don't know where I am on this. Oh, there we go. And you basically fill these out, and you say that in the Health and Human Services budget line 72 increase from 10 million to 20 million or whatever it is. Okay. Let me show you what programs look like in the military, and let's do missiles. And so I'm going to skip down. And let's see. Oops, did I pass it? Okay. So this is from the budget, and this is a line item in the budget. It's that's on the first page. But you can see contractor and location. That's Lockheed Martin Missile and Fire Command, I think it's called. It's a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. It has the quantity, 84, it has the unit cost, how much these things cost, and that's part of the budget. And that's a missile. And so if you wanted to give an earmark to Lockheed Martin, or essentially, you can say that you want, let's scroll back up to page 1, which will have the line item and program number.
Isn't this budget request stuff?
This is a budget request, right? And so, and this is what members of Congress work off, though, when they're submitting their programmatic requests. And so there you've got the line item number, and the title, and Patriot System summary, so on. And you know, I did a little looking at this one. Let me see. And so here's one. This was like a $777 million request for, and let me see, do I have that document linked? There we go. And the thing, you know, it's funny because a lot of things that happen in Washington is whoever controls the definition. There we go. This is a programmatic request. It's increased the president's budget request of $874.9 million by up to $777.6 million, and this is for a second Virginia-class nuclear submarine, and that's a heck of a lot bigger than most of the earmarks we used to see. But it's exactly the same thing. And and who makes the Virginia-class submarine? It's General Dynamics Electric Boat, which are in Connecticut, which are in Blumenthal State. But this goes on. This is like this is what replaced earmarks. And I don't know if you remember, but back in 2006, I think, the Bush administration, it was right after Bush signed the Coburn-Obama bill, which created USAspending.gov. He announced that his Office of Management and Budget was going to go through the budget and list all the earmarks. And they were going to list all the earmarks and put them on a database online on the OMB site. And they did. And the top recipients of earmarks were like Boeing, which had like, $400 million, and Lockheed Martin, which had like $600 million, and all of these big defense contractors, and they were the ones getting the earmarks because the administration just defined it differently than Congress defined it. And Congress defined it as things that aren't programmatic. So you put in like the $1 million request for some local, company that makes transmission pans to get transmission pans made for Humvees or something, that's what, that was an earmark. According to Congress. But, that's not the definition of an earmark that we were using, or that taxpayers for common sense were using, were the ones who are the real earmark experts. And this is how this is happening, and it's still happening. So when they say that, the problem is there's not really, enough earmarks and corruption to grease the skids, I mean, people who say that do not know what they're talking about.
Can you talk, did you get the letter from Blumenthal there?
Mm-hmm.
The letters from members are not public per se.
No, they're not.
Come out.
This one, he actually posted it on his website, so I felt bad picking on him because he was being transparent, but it was on his website. I mean, and so that's where I found it, and it's still online, so.
How long does it take you to work on one of these stories?
Oh God, if you ask my outgoing executive director, way too long. There's something I'm working on now, which is the top 200 donors and what do they get in return. And I've spent about a year on this, and it's just basically a ton of spreadsheets, and there's no text yet. And Lois Wark, who was Barlett and Steele's editor, Barlett and Steele are actually great, amazing writers, but she used to say that the first drafts of their stories, because they did a lot of stuff with statistics and computer-assisted reporting, and she said, the first draft that I get from them, it looks like a grocery receipt. And that's what I don't even have the words yet, I just have the numbers. So, but it depends on what I'm doing, though. The Northrop Grumman story was actually I saw that in the bill, and it wasn't all that revolutionary, but I thought, and I knew about the PAC, and I spent maybe 2 or 3 days on it, and I made a few calls, and did this, that, and the other thing, and just put it together, and that was really quick. This one with the programmatic requests, where I think there were 3 stories where I called them dark marks, which sadly did not catch on, and people did not start investigating dark marks, and maybe this was my branding or the name I came up with. But I am the guy who invented the term dark money. If you check, I don't think it's my name, but Sunlight Foundation came up with it. I was the one who came up with it, Sunlight.
It sounds like something out of Harry Potter, actually, dark marks.
Sort of, yeah. That may have been a mistake.
Which should have helped it really pop, I think.
Well, there were a couple of others like near marks, which I thought was pretty good,
Near
but
marks, I like
we
that.
went through several different iterations. But anyway, but that one took that was maybe like a month or two, and it really depends on what the story is. And some things, I'm usually doing 10 different things at once, so it's really hard for me to estimate how long any one thing takes.
Like any project, you fit it in.
Exactly.
Other stuff. Well, Bill, thank you so much. I'm going to let you
Oh.
grow your collection of NPF mugs.
Thank you
Soon
so
you'll have
much.
a complete set, whatever that is.
Everybody steals them from me, so I've got to be careful with this one.
That's
so.
actually good. I like to hear that. That's great. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you so much.
It's great.
And